Welcome back to Hopeful Horizon, where we bring you stories that challenge the status quo and inspire change. Today, we uncover a tale of injustice, deception, and the ultimate reckoning. It starts with Malcolm Graves, a black man pulled over for a routine traffic stop, only to find himself framed by corrupt officers who believe they can manipulate the system without consequence. But what they don't realize is that Malcolm isn't just an ordinary man. He's been trained for situations far more dangerous than this. As the courtroom becomes the battleground for truth, what unfolds will shock everyone watching. Stay with us for a gripping story of resilience, justice, and a twist that will leave you speechless. If you love powerful stories filled with unexpected turns and real-world lessons, be sure to comment below and let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an inspiring story from Hopeful Horizon. And let us know where you're listening from. The small southern town of Briarwood was the kind of place where time seemed to move a little slower. With its aging brick buildings, sleepy diners, and a main street that hadn't changed in decades, it was a town where everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. Malcolm Graves wasn't from Briarwood. He had only been passing through on his way to a friend's wedding in Atlanta. Dressed in a sleek black suit and driving a late-model black sedan, he looked out of place on the empty backroads of the county. It was almost midnight when the blue and red lights flickered in his rearview mirror, cutting through the darkness like a warning shot. Sighing, Malcolm pulled over to the side of the road, already knowing how this was going to play out. He kept both hands visible on the steering wheel, his breathing steady. The officer approached slowly, his flashlight cutting across Malcolm's face before moving through the interior of the car. "License and registration," the officer said, his voice clipped and devoid of politeness. Malcolm complied, handing over his documents without a word. The officer, Sergeant Kyle Briggs, studied them for a long moment before glancing back at his partner, a stocky officer named Daniels. "You know why I pulled you over?" Briggs asked, his lips curling into a smirk. "No, sir," Malcolm replied evenly. "Broken tail light." Malcolm frowned. He knew his car was in pristine condition. "I don't believe—" "Step out of the vehicle," Briggs interrupted, his hand now resting on the grip of his service weapon. Malcolm hesitated for only a second before slowly opening the door and stepping out. The humid night air wrapped around him as the officers closed in, their body language tense. "You got anything on you?" Briggs asked, circling Malcolm like a predator. "No, sir," Briggs chuckled. "We'll see about that." Before Malcolm could react, Daniels grabbed him from behind, slamming him against the car. The impact sent a sharp jolt of pain through his ribs, but Malcolm didn't resist. He knew better than to fight back. Briggs moved to the driver's side and leaned into the car. A few seconds later, he emerged, holding a small plastic bag of white powder in one hand and a rusted revolver in the other. "Well, well, well," Briggs mused. "What do we have here?" Malcolm exhaled slowly, keeping his eyes forward. "That's not mine." Briggs grinned, slapping the drugs onto the hood of the car. "Sure it isn't. You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute an illegal firearm possession." Daniels yanked Malcolm's arms behind his back, locking the cuffs tighter than necessary. The metal bit into his skin, but Malcolm remained calm. Even when Briggs drove a fist into his gut, doubling him over, he stayed silent. "Resisting arrest?" Briggs sneered. "You're making this too easy." Malcolm took the beating without a sound, his mind working quickly. He wasn't scared. He wasn't even angry. He was calculating. Because what these men didn't know was that they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. As Briggs shoved him into the back of the squad car, Malcolm caught his breath and turned his gaze to the night sky. The stars were bright, indifferent to the corruption playing out beneath them. Then, with a quiet smirk, he whispered to himself, "Game on." From the back seat, he shifted slightly, making himself comfortable. His hands, though cuffed, moved deftly as he pressed a sequence of buttons on the sleek, barely noticeable watch on his wrist. A single call went out, not to a lawyer, to the CIA. The trial moved fast, too fast. Within days, Malcolm found himself in the courtroom, sitting quietly at the defense table. His public defender was a young man with nervous hands, already sweating through his cheap suit. He had been assigned the case last minute, completely unprepared for what was coming. Across the room, Sergeant Briggs and Officer Daniels sat with smug confidence, their uniforms crisp, their lies rehearsed. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with graying hair, painted Malcolm as a dangerous criminal, a drug trafficker caught red-handed. He was found with narcotics and an unlicensed firearm in his vehicle, the prosecutor told the jury. And let's not forget, he resisted arrest. Malcolm said nothing. He didn't object, didn't defend himself. He sat there, hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. The jury, all white, looked at him with barely disguised contempt. This was an open and shut case to them. A black man caught with drugs and a gun? They had seen this story before. Briggs took the stand, his performance flawless. The suspect became aggressive, Briggs testified. We attempted to de-escalate the situation, but he refused to cooperate. My partner and I had no choice but to restrain him. Daniels nodded along, backing up every word. Malcolm studied them, his gaze piercing but unreadable. He could see it, the arrogance, the certainty that they had already won. But then something shifted. A woman in the back of the courtroom, dressed in all black, met Malcolm's gaze and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Malcolm smirked. The prosecutor, confused by his reaction, hesitated. Mr. Graves, do you have anything to say in your defense? For the first time, Malcolm spoke. His voice was smooth, confident, and laced with something unsettling. No, he said simply. Not yet. Briggs narrowed his eyes, shifting slightly in his seat. Daniels, less composed, fidgeted nervously. The judge glanced at the prosecutor. Proceed. But now the confidence in the room was beginning to wane. Something was off. Malcolm wasn't scared. He seemed almost amused. As the trial continued, that feeling of unease spread. It was in the way Malcolm sat, composed, calculating. It was in the way his lawyer, though young and nervous, suddenly seemed more assured. And it was in the way that woman in black never took her eyes off Malcolm, as if she were waiting. Briggs swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. For the first time, the officers who had framed an innocent man began to feel the weight of something they didn't expect, doubt. And Malcolm? He just leaned back in his chair and smiled. The air in the packed courtroom was thick with tension. The jury, a mixture of men and women who had sat through days of fabricated evidence and well-rehearsed testimony, shifted in their seats, waiting for the final blow to be delivered to Malcolm Graves. He sat calmly, hands folded on the defense table, expression unreadable. He had barely spoken since the trial began, allowing the prosecution to paint him as a dangerous criminal, a man with a history of violence and drug activity. Sergeant Kyle Briggs sat in the front row, a smug grin stretched across his face. He had done this before, framed an innocent black man, watched him be swallowed by the system, and then moved on to his next victim without a second thought. But something about Malcolm's demeanor unsettled him. He wasn't pleading, he wasn't crying, and he sure as hell wasn't breaking. The judge cleared his throat, preparing to call for closing arguments, when Malcolm's lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, rose from his seat. Your Honor, before we proceed, I have new evidence that I would like to present to the court. Briggs and his fellow officers stiffened. The prosecutor scoffed. Your Honor, the defense has had ample time to present evidence. This is clearly a last-ditch effort. The judge eyed Pierce. Mr. Pierce, this better be something substantial. Pierce nodded and handed a flash drive to the bailiff, who inserted it into the courtroom's media system. The large screen flickered to life. At first, there was static, then grainy footage. It was from a body cam, the same footage that had been reported as corrupt and unrecoverable. The room fell into a stunned silence as the video played. Briggs and his officers were seen pulling Malcolm over, yanking him from his car before he could speak. They planted a bag of cocaine under his seat, then a Glock in the glove compartment. But the most damning part was the audio. You think anyone's gonna believe him? Briggs laughed. Just another thug off the streets, another officer added. The jury gasped. The judge leaned forward, his expression darkening. The prosecutor's face turned ashen, but it wasn't over. Pierce clicked another file. This time, it was audio recordings, private conversations between Briggs and his men, celebrating their victory before the trial even began. By this time next week, he'll be locked up, and we'll have another promotion on the way. Briggs shot up from his seat. This is outrageous. This evidence is doctored. Malcolm finally spoke, his voice calm, but laced with an authority that made the room still. You fools really thought I was just some guy? He reached into his pocket and pulled out his credentials. I work for the CIA. Briggs and the officers paled as Malcolm's words sank in. The prosecutor, seeing the walls closing in, turned on Briggs. Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, the state is dropping all charges against Mr. Graves and formally requesting the immediate arrest of Sergeant Briggs and his officers. Briggs bolted for the door, but he never made it. The moment he stepped outside the courtroom, Malcolm's CIA team was waiting. They moved in silently, smoothly, weapons drawn but unnecessary. Briggs and his men were tackled, cuffed, and read their rights. Malcolm walked past them, adjusting his suit. He leaned in close to Briggs, voice low and dangerous. You messed with the wrong man. Briggs could only stare, horror settling in as he was dragged away. The fallout was swift and brutal. The local news exploded with the scandal, and within hours, the town's entire police department was under federal investigation. Years of corruption, hidden under carefully doctored reports and coerced confessions, were dragged into the light. The mayor, desperate to save face, publicly condemned the officers, but the damage was already done. Malcolm didn't stick around to watch it unfold. He had done his part. As he walked out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed him, microphones shoved in his face. One voice cut through the chaos. Mr. Graves, how does it feel to take down the system? Malcolm paused, a slow smirk forming on his lips. This isn't the system. This was just a few pawns. The real game is bigger. He stepped into a waiting black SUV, the tinted windows swallowing him whole. Inside, his phone buzzed. Another mission, another battle against corruption. The town would never forget the day Malcolm Graves turned the courtroom into his own battlefield, and neither would the world. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey of truth, justice, and accountability. Malcolm's story reminds us that corruption can thrive in the shadows, but when the right light is shined, justice prevails. It's a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of exposing wrongdoing, no matter the cost. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to leave a comment and let us know your thoughts. Where are you listening from? And if you found this story meaningful, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss another story that challenges, inspires, and leaves a lasting impact. We'll be back with more stories that remind us why the fight for justice is never over. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay aware, and always stand for what's right.